Um, as to the answer of why you're having trouble getting into Zoom, I don't know. I have plenty of room. There's room for 500 people tonight.
Oh, oh my God, how
So
fabulous.
they should be able to get in. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to this presentation of A Father's Kaddish, a discussion on the film done by Jen Kaplan. My name is Gay Dennett. I am the reference program specialist here at the Needham Free Public Library. Tonight's program is sponsored by the Library Foundation in Needham. They do a lot of our programs during the school year. They are located at lfnonline.org. They are very much worthy of your support, especially in this very trying time period. Before we start, I'd like to do introductions of tonight's participants. Jen Kaplan has been making documentary films since 2000 with the debut of her first film, Mixed Blessings, which debuted in 2005. Additionally, she worked as a fundraising producer at Connecticut Public Television and served as the Associate Director of the Filmmakers Collaborative in Boston. Since 2011, she's focused her efforts on producing 5 to 7 minute films for a variety of nonprofit organizations. A Father's Kaddish is her most recent film from her company, Spencer Films. The subject of tonight's film, Stephen Branfman, received his MAT from the Rhode Island School of Design in 1975 and enjoys an international reputation as a clay artist. In 1977, he founded the Potter's Shop and School in Needham, Mass. as his studio, pottery school, and gallery. He's been teaching pottery at the Thayer Academy in Braintree, Mass. for 42 years. His rakuware is in the collection of several museums. He gives demonstrations and lectures of his pottery, forming, glazing, and firing techniques all over the world. And tonight's moderator is Lynette Liebling. Lynette is a faculty member in the psychology department at Wheaton College. She also works as a private consultant for nonprofits, state and local agencies. Lynette has served on nonprofit boards, including the Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts, the Resilient Sisterhood Project, the Philanthropy Connection, and the New England Holocaust Commission. She has served as president of the board of the AIDS Action Committee in Massachusetts and of congregation, let's hope I don't mess this up, Dorshai Sezdek, an affiliate of Reconstructing Judaism. So I'm going to go away and Lynette.
Thanks, Gay. That was a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. So welcome everyone. And Jen and Steve, I know really are open. Steve has said to me numerous times, really any question. He's here to answer our questions about his experience, his art, so is Jen. And what we really want is to take as many of your questions as we can tonight. So I'm just gonna start us off. When you have a question, please just, you can ask it, you can use the raise your hand function. If you look at the bottom of your screen, it has the word reaction. If you just touch that button on reaction, you can see where it says raise hand. I can call on you to ask your question, or you could just signal me in the chat box, or if it's a quiet moment, just kind of shout out, because we really want to hear from you. So I'm just going to start us off, and I'm going to start asking Jen. Jen, what spoke to you in Steve's story? Why make this film?
It's a great question. I think really it was the man. I have to say that when Steve and I first met, and we really first met when I was filming his exhibition a couple of days before it was going to come down, and I interviewed him and we talked, and I saw this beautiful artwork that he had created, but it was really his story. And I think all through, at least my professional life, stories are what sort of drives me. And I love to hear people's story. And I just thought his story was so beautiful and so tender and heart-wrenching all at the same time, that I felt that it was a story that needed to be told more than just, you know, Steve and me sitting in a room, that it really would have resonance with other people who had suffered losses. And that's really what spoke to me.
You know, it's so beautiful. Like, I just want to thank you for making it. It is, you know, thank you, Steve, for agreeing to have it made. It's just, I'm inspired and deeply awed by your participation and your willingness to tell your story. And my first question to you is, why did you agree to make this film? Like, to participate?
Oh, I mean, it was a completely serendipitous convergence of circumstances that allowed this to happen in the first place. And um, I think the first thought that came to my mind when Jen came to see the exhibition and film the exhibition, and then when she told me that she wanted to make a film about it, the first thing that crossed my mind was a selfish one. And the selfish reason being that this was going to be another way for me to share Jared and to hope that people would not forget him, the hope that people would remember him. One of the themes that comes up, and you know, kind of going fast forward a little bit because this will probably come up later in our conversation, but one of the themes that comes up in our Fathers Forever group is the fear that the memory of our children will be forgotten. And Ellen and I and Adam are blessed to have had and continue to have many avenues to share Jared and for Jared's memory to not be forgotten. But this was just another one at the time, and I couldn't say no. I had to say yes.
What, Steve, what's the message for you that you'd like each of us to take from this film?
Oh, that's a great question. There's more than one message. There are so many messages here. Messages from me as the subject, messages from Jen as the artist, messages from the people that are in the film, Rabbi Perkins, my dear friend Dan, Howard, my father's forever friend. There's so many messages. For me, in retrospect, in looking at the film and thinking back, my message is that there is life before a loss like this, and there's life after. And when people get to know us, people that didn't know Jared, and people that come into our lives now and they know a little bit about us, they know that we've had a child that has passed away, and in conversation it comes up, you know, I might say something, or Ellen might say something like, we live a blessed life. And I can see the wheels spinning in their minds. You know, how can Steve or Ellen say that they live a blessed life? They've had a child pass away. Well, we have learned to incorporate what has happened in our lives, and we see it as life after. And we've chosen to, I guess, after a fashion, raise our chins and our heads up and do the best we can to live the kind of life that we have always lived.
Well, if that's one of your desires of what comes out of this film, I can say that's certainly one of the things that touched my heart deeply in it. You know, very deeply is that message. And Jen, what is your hope and people, what they take away from you having made this movie?
So I think there are a couple things. One is that I want people to feel like they have an opportunity to not to necessarily do a project as big as Steve's, but that there are different ways of creating ritual in your life to help with some kind of crisis that passes, or someone who's passed away whom you love. And so if it's, you know, taking a hike once a month, or we heard on the discussion last week about somebody making a breakfast that their mother loved, even though they didn't really love the breakfast, that they make it in her honor. And so there are different ways to mark time and mark the experience. I think the other thing for me is that, you know, there's hope after a loss, and that even though the film, there's quite a bit of sadness and seeing, you know, the struggle and the loss and how difficult it was and is, that that there is hope at sort of at the end of the tunnel, and that you can come out of it and maybe not get through it, but incorporate it, as Steve says, into your life in a different way. And so that's sort of the message that I hope people feel.
And I just want to encourage others on the call to hop in, ask a question if you feel moved, following up on something. This isn't just meant to be a conversation for the three of us. We really want to hear from all of you. So Jen, it's interesting that you started to take us into the territory of like what a personal Kaddish is, because I did want to ask Steve, in the movie you talk about you went to say Kaddish every day at Shul, and yet this was your personal Kaddish. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about what did it mean to have that personal Kaddish?
After we sat Shiva, and for those of you that might not know what Shiva is, it's a week of, basically it's a week of people visiting and being with you and helping you to begin to make the transition between before and after. And then the tradition is you say Kaddish. It's a prayer for mourn. It's a mourning prayer, M-O-U-R-N, mourning prayer, for 11 months minus a day. And you say it in shul in the presence of 10 people, which is a minyan. And we did that. Ellen and Adam and I did that. And I felt that I needed to do something individually. I didn't know what that was going to be. So I went into my studio thinking that this was going to be a comfortable place for me to be and an inviting place for me to be. Well, I walked in that first morning, looked around, and left. It was anything but comfortable. Jared's presence was everywhere. Jared was a clay artist. We shared a lot through our art, me as his teacher and he as my student, and later on he as my teacher and me and as his student. And it was just, it was a devastatingly sad place for me to be. And I went home and I came back the next day and I spontaneously took a piece of clay, put it on my potter's wheel, and made what became the first chawan, or Japanese style tea bowl, that I ever made. And then I came back the next day. I made 6 more to make up for the week of Shiva. And then I came back every day and made 1 a day as a single, solitary, individual act of making that had nothing to do with the day before. It had nothing to do with projecting what the next day would be. It was what it was. It was just a single, solitary, individual act. And it was just an organic process. It's not something that I planned to do. It just became something that I did.
At one point in the movie, you said, I knew immediately I would do this every day for 1 year. That was the decision. And I'm curious, how did you know? What was that feeling of knowing?
It was a feeling of knowing. It was also a feeling of commitment. It was something that I felt an immediate comfort in doing, knowing that there was at least one thing every day that I was committed to do, no matter how I felt, no matter where I was, because there were times during the year when I had to travel professionally, and I arranged beforehand to be able to make a Kaddish chawan wherever I was, either in another potter's studio because I knew people or was going to do a demonstration or give a talk, or if I was in a hotel for other kinds of travel, I brought, and I knew there wasn't going to be any place for me to make a chawan in a potter's studio. I brought clay with me and enough to make 1 for each day that I was there. And at first it was just something to commit to doing as I guess as a path. And then it shortly became something that I looked forward to doing every day, as it started my day and it got me prepared for the day. It got me going for the day. So it had multiple meanings for me. It was religious. It was ritualistic. It was it was a lot of different things. A lot of different things.
You said you would never do them at night. How come?
Because at night is when, after sundown is when we went and said Kaddish in shul. And the morning is when I did my personal Kaddish by making a Kaddish chawan. So I said Kaddish twice a day, the evening when the day began, and the morning when I woke up.
Thank you. We have a hand raised, and I cannot pronounce your name, but go for it.
Is that me?
Yes.
Yes, my name is Mieko. You said that you went to shul to say Kaddish, and I'm not Jewish, and I know only about Judaism from through my husband. But I understand to have Kaddish, you have to have minyan, which is 10 people. So you and your wife and your son went there every day. So were there 7 other adults?
There were always at least 10 people. Oftentimes there were more. This was an evening minyan that met every day at a local synagogue that we connected to. So we knew that there would be 10 people there. And in fact, the ritual director who led the evening service, we became friends with, and I'm friends with to this day. If there was a chance he thought that there wouldn't be a minyan, he had a list of minyaneers that he would call and say, we need a minyan tonight. It's very important. You've got to be here. So there were always at least 10 people there.
I see. And did you do that for 11 months every day?
We did it for 365 days, even though the Jewish tradition is 11 months minus a day, because for me and for us, it was a kind of a melding of the religious aspect and tradition and a secular one, because the making of my chawans was 365 days, and that was for me religious in a way, but it was also secular and ritualistic. That was related to my Judaism, but not, connected in that way.
Thank you.
Jen, go for it.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I just wanted to also add about Kaddish is that it's also a community, it's not an event is not the right word, but it's a community act of prayer. It would be very, I don't know about easy, but it would be easier if people could just be in their own homes, say the prayer, it would take them a few minutes and then be done with it. But that's not the way it is. So in reference to your question, people must be in community of, as you said, 10 adults or more, 10 Jewish adults, and say it sort of as an affirmation of God, because that's what the prayer is, but also to be in community while you're suffering this loss. And I think that has become a very powerful thing for people to be able to be in community. And so everybody knows, what's happening with the other people, and some people just come to support those, but it is a very supportive environment that's very important.
I want to also spotlight my dear friends, Yaakov and Amy Guterson. And Yaakov, you can, and Amy, please, add your perspective and comments about Kaddish and about Minyan.
Remember to unmute yourself, because I can't find you to
Thank
unmute.
you, Stephen.
Oh,
John, Yaakov and I know each other
Stephen and
for
I have known-
going on 43 years now.
wow.
That's correct. Saying Kaddish is incredibly powerful, because when you say the prayer, and when you say that Kaddish prayer, and you feel the person that you're saying it for inside of you. And you feel their neshama, their soul, surrounding you. And so that's incredible connection. What you're also doing by virtue of saying the Kaddish prayer is you are not only inviting the person that you loved so dearly to be you, but you're also connecting that person more and more with spirituality, with godliness, sort of lifting their soul more and more. So it's a joint effort. They're touching you and you are touching them. And it's just incredibly powerful. And yes, being with other people there all together makes it even all the more powerful because people are joining with you. And it's also, they say in the world of mental health, they say that the most intense grieving time is the first year. So just from that perspective, the 11 or 12-month period of time is just a very important time, a very intense time when you are truly honoring and showing your love toward the one you still love forever and ever. Amy, you want to add something? So,
Thank you for that, Yaakov. Thank you.
I just want to add one other thing, if I may.
Please.
Saying that I've known Amy and I've known Stephen for almost 43 years. He and I first met when we were both teachers at Thayer Academy. And without putting too many tears in his eyes, I must say that at the beginning, when Jared was first diagnosed, he was near where we live, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Hey, Howard.
And for that first
Hi,
summer,
thank you. I'm in the Zoom now.
Steve
Can
and
I call you
Ellen
back?
and Adam,
Thank you.
they were with us. And as was Jared, and some of the time he was at a rehab, and Adam as well. And it was just such so bonding to be together. We went over to the rehab institute where Jared was, and we had a whole Sabbath meal there, and we danced and we sang. But one thing I remember in particular is Jared his hair was getting longer. And I just remember Steve said, well, of course I'm going to be the one to give him a haircut. And I just the devotion that he had, I watched him as he gave Jared the haircut. It was just so loving, and the father's love, a father's Kaddish, a father's love, it just so powerful and impacted on me as a father myself. And I think that's another impact that Steve and that Jared have as life goes on. Just to see the intense love between them and how that has touched me, and it continues to touch me and touches the world in terms of that powerful connection which
and
goes
it's
on and
expressed so
on.
well in the film.
Correct.
So
Yeah. We could not stop crying the entire time.
Thank you, Yaakov, for sharing that. Thank you. So
Thank you.
it's interesting to hear us have this larger discussion about the saying Kaddish with community. Because Steve, what you also have is your personal Kaddish. And as Rabbi Perkins talked about in the movie, Kaddish helps us move through the experience of grief and loss. And you had the community part of it, and you also had the personal making the chawans. And I'm wondering how that piece, how the two kind of work together for you, that personal private one, And we, because you talked about the community piece of it.
They were different. They were very different. In the obvious way, as you just said, is the Kaddish that we said in shul in the evening was in the presence of at least 10 people. It was almost always more. And as Yaakov expressed, it's the community. It's being with other people. It's being in a minyan. And a friend in a Q&A recently expressed minyan this way, and she said that minyan is your legs until you have your own back. Wow. So that was that part of it. And my individual, solitary, private Kaddish was, I guess, in a way, it became a communion between Jared and me, between me and Jared. And the only other things I thought about were the things that influenced me and inspired me that day. I mean, the inspiration was always Jared, but the influence was the weather, the time of the year, the date, because there are many significant milestone dates over the course of a year that relate to a loved one. It was how I just felt that morning. All of these things that influence an artist when they do their work were aspects and ingredients that went into every Kaddish chawan. So yes, there was a religious connection, but it was more of a communion between my son and I.
Yeah. Might I share, because you talked about how the light, the time of year, the date affected, and I just have a photo of 3 of the different ones. If you can maybe just comment on that to let us
Sure.
look at it, and
Yeah.
Can everybody see that? 3 important dates for you.
Yeah. So these are the three most significant dates. So Kaddish Chawan number 1 of 365, September 27th, 2005 is the day that Jared passed away. Number 235 on May 16th is Jared's birthday. And then the final one that I made, number 365 on September 26th, 2006. So these are among a handful of very important or very milestone dates. It's not really accurate to say important, but it is more descriptive to say milestone dates. So these are 3 of the most significant milestone dates.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, milestone feels very different, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because every one, 365 out of 365 were equally important. They're all tied for first place.
Yeah. So Jen, to switch a little here, I'm curious some of the things you included in the movie. Why the trip? Mm-hmm. The trip to Alfred is a really important, to me, viewing the movie, a very important piece. And I'm curious kind of how you chose to put that in and why that was important to you.
Well, I think that it was extremely important because it was, I don't know about full circle, but certainly there was an element for Steve to have to go back to Alfred, where his son had taken classes and was studying. And he was, Steve may say more about this, but that he was asked to teach a master class. So he wasn't ready for a long time to do that. And he went back and did that. But the other piece that was much more intense was the fact that he had left, when Jared took his medical leave, all of his items were there in that storage locker. And there wasn't a good enough, not necessarily reason, but it was very difficult to try and make that trip. So Steve agreed to do that. And to me, that was so crucial. in the editing phase, I cried every single time I've seen it. And, you know, and I try not to see it anymore because I just will absolutely automatically cry when he opens up, you know, those things. And it's just, you know, you just get this wave of intensity and sadness and grief and all these feelings wrapped up. And I felt like that was a really important thing to show people. And I think anybody who's a parent, and maybe people that aren't even parents, can just sense that intensity. And so for me, that was something that I absolutely wanted to be in the film.
It's important to understand too, as you begin to understand more about the genesis and the making of the film, is that I didn't go back to Alfred because of the film. I went back to Alfred because I was invited to teach a 2-week master class there. And when that invitation came, and it came in December of 2005, just a few months after Jared passed away, and it came from one of Jared's mentors there, because that's where Jared went to school, obviously. And Wayne Higby is also a very good friend of mine for many, many years. And it was his class that he asked me to take over that following summer. And it took me a few weeks to resolve in my own mind, and in talking to Ellen about it, that I was ready to go back now. I was just ready to go back. You know, it was not quite a year after Jared passed away, but it was 10 years after Jared. I was just ready to go, and I did. And it was another example of this organic nature of the film, where I was going and Jen was making the film.
Christopher Pitts, you've been patient with your hand raised. Thank you.
Not at all. It's a great listening to this story, which just continues and grows. I was actually privileged to see an early cut of this, probably about a year ago. Was that, Jen?
Yeah.
You know, without all the filigree of it, but you know, music and stuff like that. And what the movie I just saw was so evolved from that cut. Wonderful pacing and stuff. I wanted to ask you, Jen, what did you learn from this project?
Wow. So many things. We'll have to have coffee, Chris, I think, to talk about this more.
No, don't hold back here. We all want to know.
Yeah.
Oh, no, forget it. We're just going to have coffee. It's so many layers. I mean, I think that it's funny. It's a quote that I often say to my wife, that less is more. What Chris saw was, I invited some filmmaker friends. Chris and I serve on the Newton Cultural Council together. And Chris was included in that to give feedback on a rough cut. And it was about 43, 44 minutes that we whittled down to about 30, 31. And in a film world, that's a lot of material to take out. And so we had material with the Fathers Forever group, and I wanted every single piece kept in there. And so my editor and I really had to struggle. So I think one of the things I learned is that you can make a point without banging somebody over the head about it, and then it still comes through and it's still powerful. I still miss some of that footage, I have to admit, but I don't think the film suffered without it. Another thing that I learned is just how other people's, and I think I sort of knew this, but it really was cemented, how other people's stories can really impact folks from all around. I mean, where we've shown the film, people have been very, very touched by Steve's story and by the film, and that, it's one man's story, but that doesn't mean that it's limited to the impact of it. And so I think those are sort of two things. It's a great question, and I need to think more about it, but I think those are the two things that really come to me off the bat. So thanks, Chris, for being here.
Can I, thank my privilege, can I ask Stephen one question as well? It's about being an artist. Artists often have periods of style, like Picasso had his blue period and Miles Davis had his impressionistic period. And these different styles sometimes are spurred on by life events. And I just wondered if during this period you also had an evolution. Did you change your style? Were they radical? Were they small? Or how did you channel this into your creative artist?
What
You
a
mean,
great question.
you mean the experience of Jared's passing and the making of the Kaddish chawans, and it hasn't changed or influenced my style in any way. However, just like I was describing earlier, life before and life after, that encompasses every single aspect of my life, including my artwork. So yes, my inspiration, I'll say, for making vessels and for making pottery has now incorporated Jared. So every single piece that I make, Jared is sitting on my shoulder. There's nothing that's overtly visible to anybody. For example, there are collectors of my work that have been collecting my work for years, from my student days until to today, and they wouldn't, only because they know me and they know my story, would they, they're sophisticated enough to maybe interject some of their own thoughts into observing my work. But there's nothing overtly changed about my work. My style is vessel. I make vessels. My style is firing in the Japanese technique of raku. So nothing like that has changed in any overt way. But my inspiration, yes, has changed, has now incorporates Jared in every single thing that I do. But that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Fabrian Rosen, you have your hand raised, and then Stephanie Osser.
Yes, Steve, I was just wondering if the different textures that you incorporated in the cups, if they had any specific meaning, and also the when you finally decided to glaze them, if the glazes had spoke to you in any particular way in the combinations.
Yeah, great question, and a very sophisticated one as well. Each Kaddish chawan was an individual act of making, inspired by Jared, inspired by the communion that I felt between myself and my son in making the chawans. But they were influenced aesthetically, as I described earlier, by that morning that I was in the studio. The things that I said before, the weather, the environment, the landscape, what it looked like outside the window of my studio, the humidity, the temperature, things as subtle that you might think of, things like when I walked into the building where my studio is, did I pass anybody? Was there anybody that I had to say hello to? Did I engage anybody in conversation before that? Which was rare because I went in early in the morning, but it wasn't impossible. There were people here and there that I crossed paths with. So all of these things that we take for granted when we wake up in the morning and brush our teeth and get dressed and have breakfast and go out and these are all the things that influence an artist in the making of their work. And Jen and Chris and Stephanie who is an incredible ceramic artist, and anybody else, Topher, my friend, who's a photographer, and anybody else who's on the Zoom that makes things, understands that and connects and can connect with that. So that's a long answer to a short, sophisticated question. As far as the glazing is concerned, another thing that's important for everybody to remember and remind themselves of is that I glazed and fired them 9 years after I created them. So the things that influenced me when I glazed them and fired them were completely different than when I fashioned them 10 years earlier.
Mhm.
Mm.
Was there any symbolism specific symbolism that you incorporated in them as you were doing them?
By symbolism, do you mean overt images and things like
Mhm.
that?
Mhm. Or maybe not so overt. Yeah.
No,
Mhm.
no. The symbolism is simple. The symbolism is that these were my personal, individual, daily Kaddish. That's the symbolism.
I just want you to know it's been very moving to me. I
Thank
don't
you.
have any children of my own, but I have had great losses. And so this has been very meaningful to me. And thank you.
You're welcome. Thank
Thank you
you.
for being here.
Yeah.
So Stephanie, you've been patient, and I just want to do, Koopa had a quick question about the glazing also. So,
Sure.
but do you want to pop in real quick? Because you've been patient also.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. There was such a length of time between the throwing and the glazing. And as somebody who grew up in New England, so I'm very familiar with the seasons and the changes, but I've also just gotten back into pottery and making. And I'm just curious, what was the influence there? Revisiting a piece that you had thrown 10 years ago, and then applying color to it, and then that must have been a super surreal experience, right?
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean,
You know,
surreal is an excellent way to express it. It's a very excellent way to express it. When I made them, as I said, they were made one a day, an individual solitary act of making. When I glazed over the course of 365 days, when I glazed them and fired them, I glazed and fired them in groups of 7 to signify a week. So the approach was different to start with, although I spaced it out, and it took a year. In fact, the last week of them, the last 7, I glazed and fired, and I fired them, took them out of the kiln, and had them finished 2 days before I installed the exhibition. So it literally, I started doing them on the anniversary of Jared's passing, and I did them over the course of a year. And it was the things that influenced me when I glazed and fired them were very different than the things that influenced me 10 years earlier, as you can
yeah,
imagine, because you're making pots, and you can't imagine making something and then putting it aside and coming back 10 years later and glazing it. It would be almost irrelevant. A piece like that would have a degree of irrelevance to it, because you grow and you change and you develop as an artist and as a creative person over the course of 2 months, let alone 10 years.
yeah, absolutely. And that for me, as somebody who I was into pottery and ceramics a lot in high school, and I've gotten recently back into it 20 years later. And that was for me the really fascinating thing
Right.
about it.
I'll
Right.
say that a couple more things about that. The first is that I started doing pottery in 1972. So I'm going on 50 years of having my hands in mud. Okay, so, that's 20 years is a long time, working with clay, but 50 years is even longer.
Absolutely.
So, that's an aspect of being able to go back to something that I did 9 years earlier or 10 years earlier. The other thing is that despite the fact that such a long time had passed, each Kaddish chawan was connected. The Kaddish chawan made 10 years earlier and the Kaddish chawan that I was glazing that day were connected like a rubber band. They were kind of using that as a metaphor. If you think of it almost as two different objects that were connected by a rubber band, and that rubber band just then brought them back together that day that I was glazing and firing.
See, and that to me is incredible because again, having something in your hands that you made 10 years prior and then having it in your hands again. I mean, that I figured that there must have, obviously there's that connection there.
Right.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked because I had never expressed it that way, and your question, got me to think more about that. And the other thing to remember too is that these 365 Kaddish chawans were in plain sight in my studio. They were on shelves covered in clear plastic. So I saw them every day. And they weren't covered in plastic to hide them. They were covered in plastic only to keep them clean, and keep the dust off them.
I'm just going to hop in here because we have people ready to ask questions.
Yeah.
And Stephanie,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes,
I don't
please.
wanna-
No, that was great.
I don't want to take up too much of your time.
No, that was good. Thank you.
You can connect with me afterwards, Copa.
All right, thank you so much.
Go ahead, yeah.
Thank you for your patience.
Well, first of all, I was very moved by this film, this documentary, Steve, and Jen, you did a marvelous job for piecing it together. The music was moving to me. I'm, into music, and I loved the way you seamed everything together. It just flowed and lovely.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, what happened to all those chawans that were in the show that I went to at Thayer? Where are they?
They are, there 250 of them are in the possession of other people.
Ta-da! I just want to show you one.
That's right.
I wasn't sure how many were in the possession of other people, but I'm just
Yes,
turning it round and round so you can enjoy how gorgeous this one is. It's
Amy,
hard to pick.
Yaakov, Daryl, Stephanie.
Oh, look,
Marlene.
everybody is, oh, look.
Yeah.
Oh, that's marvelous.
And
Yeah.
mine is 356. So if you need to bring it to another show, let me know.
I will. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
So Mieko.
Thank you for sharing.
Sorry.
The last few questions sort of answered part of my question. So among those three chawan that you showed us, I noticed that the second one that you made on on his birthday, and the last one, the last day of the 1 year, I noticed that there was the progression. It feels like pale pink in both the last two pots.
Yeah.
And the last one, the pink was even a little darker. And as you said, that you glazed them not at that day, but later. And so I'm wondering if those pink reflects any of your feeling or I don't know if I can say hope or any communication with Jared that day, or the
Yes.
day that you glazed. And I was just wondering.
Okay. Well, my answer is going to strike you. Pink was Jared's favorite color,
Oh,
and pink was Jared's favorite color, and it's become our family, one of our family identities, and they were, I purposely use pink in a lot of my work now, whereas before I used it a bit, but I use it a lot now. Not in every piece, but I use it a lot, and that's why I used it for Jared's birthday, Kaddish, chawan, and number 365.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Margaret, you have your hand raised.
Hi, I know Steve through my children went to Thayer. And Steve, you really touched their lives in such a way. And I'm sorry, I watched that movie and it was so moving. And I only know Steve through the school and through the Pan Mass Challenge that he rides. And I never really understood all the stuff in that movie. So when I got to see it the other day, it was so moving. I mean, I'm an emotional person, but I must say, I just brought my friendship with Steve like 365. Now I understood who Jared was and all the potting. I have so many pots all over my house from Kat and Chris. And, I love the part of the movie where it was the vessel and it holds things, right? So all my kids' things, they hold my pens, they hold my plants, they hold my makeup, and so when you put that part into the movie, I thought that, that vessels hold things. And I look at that and my kids and, I lost my younger brother last year, and it's been really hard for my mom. And so when I watched this movie, I tried to take pieces and I talked to her about it. And the one thing that I thought was really significant was when you said that when a parent loses someone, they have a disability. And, I spent some time talking to her last weekend about it. My sister-in-law was there and she was talking about some friends of hers that have lost kids. And she truly thought like, yes, these people have some disability in their life. And so I just, there's so many levels, like my relationship with you and how now I just, and I don't live that far. And my husband bought a potting wheel after all the stuff that Kat and Chris did at your, with you at Thayer, and because he was so sort of inspired by it. And so I just, and then thirdly, I'm a physician and I take care of kids, nothing to do with cancer or any kind of hematologic issues, but I do get families at times that I see them in all different capacities, the allergies and asthma and immunologic issues. But, I think it was just so nice to sort of watch how you processed this loss. And, whether it will help me communicate with them about their child somehow, or I'm not sure, but I feel that this is it definitely, it can empower you a little bit to be able to sort of help somebody else somewhere along the line. We all have our experiences, and our job in this world is to take those experiences and to help the next person who has that experience, which is what you're
Well
doing.
said, Margaret.
Right?
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah,
That's what
very well
God
said.
puts us here for. So
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you. Thank you, Marge.
you're welcome.
Very,
I might mispronounce this, but Lakshmi. Lakshmi, thank you. You've had your hand up. Thank you. Okay, you have to unmute. I'm trying to unmute you, but yeah, you should be okay now.
Hi, Jen.
Hi,
It's
Lakshmi.
hi. It's so touching. This movie means so much to me. First of all, I lost a brother about 4.5 years ago, and sorry, I'm just too emotional for this.
Take your time.
And a mom about 8 months ago, and my dad is in ICU with COVID. I told myself I shouldn't be here because I knew I thought I could do this talking, but I just want to say that this Kaddish I didn't know that was something that existed, but I do my own little practice, and I feel, and I have felt in the last 8 months that I have those few minutes in the morning when I do the kolam. It's a rice drawing or something that I learned from my mother from when I was very young. And because my mother and we had lost my brother before her, everything that's been said here, it just is so moving because I can see the connections. I can see me in the mornings. There is a moment of total truth to this. I mean, I don't know what this connection is or what it is that brings that, but it starts my day and it composes it, and it keeps me going. It's like something that has kept me going. That's all I can say about this practice and how I feel about the movie, Jen. I'm so floored. There's so much in it that communicates to me. The pots are, for us in India, the pot is like the womb, or the pot is where the spirit is for the first 10 days. We pray, we use the pot. It's very significant. We carry the pot to the crematorium. We have a pot that stays in the house with the person's, we pray to, we feed, all the food is put into the pot. It's like the person still lives in your presence or in your home for the first 10 days. And then you actually, there's this, the pot is destroyed at a point, and then life begins anew. After the 10th day, you send them off, and on the 13th day, you celebrate their life. So it's just the act of your having done the pot. I just feel, I mean, here's a world that's tearing apart in so many levels. This whole story is just about people and how we feel so similarly across. I mean, look, I'm from a completely different culture, and I completely relate to what you've done for 365 days. Every, the act, the significance, the meaning, and everything about it. It's just incredible. So I'm so thankful that I came today. I don't know, perhaps I've used this to feel it's like a release in some ways, and a place I just felt I could talk about it.
Oh, thank you.
And when I light my lamp every morning with the kolam, I feel illuminated by the love. I can feel the love from all those years with my mom. So I just feel this was beautiful. So thank you. Sorry I took so much of your time.
Thank you, Lakshmi, so
Yeah.
much.
That was
Lakshmi, thank you.
a
That was-
beautiful kind of pulling together of our time. And I know we've really come up on 8 o'clock and I want to respect people's time, but I also want to give Jen and Steve another minute. If a question came up that it made you think of something else, kind of like some final thoughts would be lovely from each of you.
Go ahead, Jen.
Well, I just want to kind of go on what Lakshmi was saying about, being from totally different cultures and we have different traditions. And I think that, again, if there was a hope or a dream for the film, it's that people can find their own connections. And so Lakshmi is doing something in her own tradition that's providing comfort to her. And that's, again, what I want people to do. Whether you're Jewish or not, it doesn't really matter, in the sense that, you could pick up a Jewish tradition if you find it meaningful, but you can also look to your own tradition or just find something else that speaks to you that will help you through the process. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I think that's the point. It's what brings us together. It's not what separates us, but how can we share in this? And Lakshmi, I'm so sorry for your loss. I know it's been so hard for you. And I think that's really sort of one of the points for me.
Yeah, and I'll make two comments. The first related to what Jen was just saying about the connections between cultures and religions and rituals. Every week in my teaching at Thayer, I bring in a pot from my collection to share. And Ellen and I have a vast art collection, mostly pottery, and I describe it as a house where every single horizontal surface, so think of all the horizontal surfaces in your house, has pots on it. Every single the top of the toilet tank. I mean, everything. So I bring in a piece from my collection, and two things that I bring in every year. One is a Chinese vessel dating from the year 2500 BC, and the other is a northern Mexico piece from a culture called the Casas Grandes, which dates from about the year 1400. And I bring them in, I display them side by side, I bring the students over, we talk about them, I ask them questions, I ask them their observations, and I say, why did I bring these two apparently disparate pieces together? Well, you can't see them right now, but the geometric designs on them are so similar that you would think that they would be interchangeable, from a piece 5,000 years old to a piece 600 years old. And neither culture knew anything about the other. They couldn't have possibly. And yet, here are two pieces that you can almost mistakenly identify as either or. Another example of the connection between cultures, whether they are intentional or not. The other is that a question that comes up in my workshops all the time is, Steve, how do you know when your work is finished? And what the participants what they really want to know is, when do you know when to stop? And Copa, you'll relate to this. When do you know when to stop? So I turn the question back over to the participants and I ask them, I said, when do you know when your piece is finished? And somebody will say, when the neck is tall enough, or when the body is fat enough, or when the rim is wide enough, or when I can't bring up any more clay, or when I think that it's about to collapse. So eventually the question comes back around to me. So Steve, when do you know when your work is finished? My work is completed when it's in the possession of somebody else.
And that is the mic drop moment, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that was absolutely beautifully put.
And I just want to also thank you, Lynette, for Lynette is a friend of mine. We're members of the same synagogue, Dorshei Tzedek. I knew she would be amazing at this, and she was. And I just want to thank her so much for her time watching the movie about 50 or 60 times and seeing
I
different
want to see those
perspectives.
15 minutes that I didn't get to see. Now you're like, that was.
All right, all right. And
The director's cut.
so, yeah, that's right. So I want to thank you so much, and also really thank the library, the Friends of the Needham Library, for sponsoring this program, and for everybody else for being here. And I did put my website and my email in the chat. So if you want to find out where the film is screening or join the mailing list, please feel free to do that as well.
And I did put the link to the online presentation of the exhibition in the chat too. So if anybody's interested in seeing not just all 365 Kaddish chawans, but the entire exhibition as it was presented in the gallery, please go to the link.
Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for participating tonight, especially our panelists. Also, this recording will be up on the library's YouTube site sometime in the next few days. So thank you all for coming this evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank
Everybody
you
have
so
a good
much.
night.
Everyone. Great questions. Thank you.